Oh man, I think it's been like 4 or 5 days since I recorded a video when I'm a little bit, I need to loosen up a little bit. Because today we need to zen out. We're doing bonsai. This is a very special tree to me. In fact, this was my first bonsai tree that I ever got. I grossly overpaid for this thing. Maybe I'll tell you how much I paid by the end of this video. I found this bonsai in my favorite nursery. It was one of those situations where I walked in, I caught its eye, it caught my eye. We danced around a little bit. I debated it. The price tag was, in my opinion, ridiculous. There was something that told me it had to come home with me. But believe it or not, the day that we met, the day that me and this bonsai tree met, I didn't actually bring it home. I couldn't pull the trigger on it that day. And I struggled for a week thinking about it, dreaming about it. I wanted this thing so bad. I just thought it looked so cool and it had so much potential. And I've always had this fascination for dwarf umbrella trees. And I went back a week later, I picked this thing up, I paid the ridiculous price. I think I even tried to haggle with them a little bit to get it down, but they wouldn't go for it, and I did it anyways. And here we are today. It's been a season. This thing's been growing like crazy. There's branches sticking out all over the place. We're gonna prune this thing, we're gonna trim this thing, we're gonna repot this thing, we're gonna train this thing, I'm gonna use bonsai wire, we're gonna do all sorts of things. By the end of this video, this bonsai tree right here, this dwarf umbrella tree, well, it's gonna look like an entirely new plant. And for now, even though it's the coldest day of the year so far, I've got my nice hoodie on. Well, we're gonna do this part out here so we can get a little bit more messy. Mostly it's a good idea with bonsai, with really any kind of plants, to change out the soil once a year. You know, because these things are living in containers, the nutrients and everything that they're pulling from the soils, well, it depletes. It doesn't regenerate like the earth normally does for it. So it's important to get in here every once in a while just to kind of, not only to maybe size up your pot or to, you know, just kind of clean things up, clean the roots up, give them a trim, all of that sort of thing. But it's important to replenish some of the nutrients that are going to be in that soil as well. I'm trying to find that moment when it's going to be right to just kind of put a little force and yank this thing right out of the pot. Not as easy as I thought, actually. Okay, grabbing on. Oh. All right. Never mind. It's actually a little bit harder than I thought. Let me see. Feels like we might have some wire or something dug down in here into the roots. Okay. I see what's going on. Honestly, I'm not sure why these wires are down in here. Probably to anchor the roots down to this pot for some reason. But that's all we need to do. Let's give them a little loosen. This is actually one of my favorite parts of just plants in general. Is this? It's just kind of this like messy but with a purpose sort of activity, and it obviously doesn't require much thought. It doesn't take much knowledge or really much of anything to kind of dig your hands in here and just clear some dirt, feel around in the little crevices and things like that. But you know what? Not everything needs to be ultra stimulating. And that's what I like about this kind of stuff, is that it's just kind of relaxing. And, you know, as all fun things are, there is like a little game in it too, because you're sort of, you know, those little dinosaur bone things, those little dinosaur bone toys that kids buy, where you kind of chip away and you find little fossils buried in the sand or whatever it is in there. Well, that's kind of like what this is. The roots are a lot less, they're a lot more rigid than I thought they'd be. I thought they'd be a lot more kind of stringy and basically just like a big ball, but we're really dealing with, I mean, basically we're dealing with the same thing as you're looking at right here, you know, way far down into the root system here. And you know what? That's something that we might have to consider when we're repotting this thing, is actually placing it up a little bit higher above the soil level than it was previously, because, you know, there's no shame in using a little bit of those roots that were previously covered up. Let me grab our dwarf umbrella tree, now freshly unpotted. Beautiful, just beautiful roots that we discovered. Wow, what a treat that was, huh? So much of a treat. I'm going to wiggle the pot back and forth like that. A couple more things I want to show you in the garage before we head in. Look at this awesome log. That's another thing that spoke to me, but it was out in nature and made me carry it, I don't know, a mile, maybe 2 miles home. That's the big pot I've got waiting for our umbrella tree one day. Now the thing about bonsai is that you want your soil to be very, very well aerated. You're going to be watering these things quite often, so rather than having a substrate that sort of holds the moisture around those roots for extended periods of time, we want to aerate this stuff even more. We want to aerate this up even more. And how we're going to be doing that is by using just a basic gravel. And you can use whatever kind of gravel you want. You don't even have to use gravel, to be honest with you. You can use anything. You could use orchid bark. You could use anything that just kind of gives a lot of aeration to your soil. Again, you want the water to pass through this stuff over your bonsai roots, but you don't want it to sit in there. You want it to pass through and quickly exit the bottom. See if we've got our mixture about right. And the way that you determine how your mixture is just right, you don't want to feel too much soil in your palms when you do this. And you don't want to feel too much gravel either. Although I would say, if you're going to lean towards one or the other, I would lean towards more gravel. And the crunchier you make it, the more forgiving it'll be. The less it'll hold on to the moisture, of course. You still got to give those roots some moisture. But the more crunchy you make it, the more forgiving it'll be as far as overwatering and that sort of thing. The really fun part is going to be what comes next. When we're getting back into this tree, we're reshaping it, we're trimming, we're pruning. We're even going to use some wire on the branches to kind of train them in the right direction. It's time to actually repot this thing. And the only thing I want to mention while I'm doing this is that because we've discovered just these gorgeous roots in the process of unearthing this thing, instead of having it buried a little deeper down in the pot, I'm actually going to raise this thing up a little bit higher, expose more of this root structure. So a few handfuls in here to get started. Let's give our tree a little test. Again, keeping in mind that we really want to push these roots above the surface like that. This is the part where you got to use your thinking cap. How about you come a little closer and tell me what you think? I think that should be just high enough down there. And now we can get in here and just start filling in soil around the bottom. Being out of the chair is definitely giving me a more of a perspective into the pot, and it makes it easier to throw the soil in there, believe it or not. So did I mention earlier, I think I might have briefly talked about it, but it wasn't until I actually got this umbrella tree, my first bonsai tree, that I even realized what bonsai was. I'm sure you know what it is, but I'll share it with you anyways, just in case you don't. I used to think it was a lot more complicated than it actually is. But the term bonsai actually just means taking any plant, really. Some are more suitable than others, of course. Like this umbrella tree is very popular for creating bonsai just because it kind of naturally wants to do that miniature tree sort of thing. But all sorts of different types of plants will work great for bonsai. And it really is just the process of taking any plant and turning it into what appears like a tiny little tree. It's an art form. And that's exactly what this video is about. This video is about making this dwarf umbrella tree even more dwarfy and tree-like. Have I also mentioned how useful? Not only useful for videoing, because I can show you 360 spins of the dwarf umbrella tree here as I work on it, but also very useful for me because I can spin it around without having to make this sound on the table. I want to interject here as well, just to talk about magic for a moment. If you've been watching my channel for any period of time at all, you'll know that I, enjoy talking about magic and that sort of thing. And one of the things that you have to understand about magic is it's not always a pop in your face, Sometimes it's just the little things. And you know what it is in this moment? You know what magic I discovered with you just moments ago? Well, how is it that we grabbed the exact perfect amount of soil? I didn't measure nothing out. I hadn't done this before. We grabbed the exact perfect amount of soil to repot our little dwarf umbrella tree back here. And it's those little things, it's those little moments that if you can catch them, you realize that just all of life is a little bit magical. And now that we've got this thing repotted, I did get a bunch of soil on some of these sweet roots that we had uncovered. And, you know, one of the main things to learn about bonsai is to just take your time doing it. Pay attention to the details, as most Japanese art forms lend themselves to. And that's exactly what we'll do right here, is we'll uncover even more of those beautiful roots. You know what I'm about to say. You got to give it that smoosh. Just kind of compress it. You don't want to go too hard on this, but compress that soil down a little bit. Marry the dirt with its new rooty roommates. This is the time to kind of wiggle everything around, get it into that perfect position before we get to the next step, because the next step is a good one. Now, normally you might think that the next step would be to get our trimmers and get in here and start clipping off some of this foliage and cleaning things up and starting to shape everything. But that's actually not what we're going to do now. I've never actually done this before. We're going to be doing it together. But right now we're going to be using something called bonsai wire. This is just a 2mm bonsai wire. You can get all sorts of different kinds of sizes and things like that. 2mm to me seemed like kind of a good in-between size. And the point of this stuff is we're actually going to wrap it around these branches, and it's going to give those branches a little bit of rigidity. I don't even know if that's the right word, rigidity, but it's going to give it a little bit of rigidity so that we can kind of bend and shape these branches into the perfect position, just ever so slightly. And then over time, as this thing grows over the next year or so, it'll work that new shape that we've set for it kind of into its little tree-like DNA cells. I don't know what it does, but the tree's going to stay like that once we actually take the wire off in the end. So we're going to leave this on for about a season, and then our tree's it's gonna have a brand new look to it. It's kind of like braces for a bonsai tree, except we're not fixing the teeth. We're fixing the branches. And in our case, this being an umbrella tree, we're going to use this wire to actually sort of bend the branches down so they kind of hoop down into, you guessed it, a little bit of an umbrella shape. And again, the reason that we've done all this is to add a little bit of, I'm going to use the word again, rigidity to these branches, because now we can twist these things down just a little bit. And this wire is going to help them sort of conform, especially near the ends where it's not as strong. Oops. Well, you definitely don't want to break your branches like that. Mistakes happen. Whoops. I'll be honest with you, that was kind of embarrassing. I'm going to leave it in the video, but it was kind of embarrassing for me. It's, dang, it was such a nice branch too. Look at this, it has this little puff of foliage. I probably would have trimmed some of this new growth off, but I for sure wouldn't have trimmed it all the way down to here. But the real plan is to go all over the tree, to find all of these little branches, all of these little new growth branches like this, and to get some wire on them so that we can train them into place just like that. And again, the main thing that I'm going for here is I really just want to sort of take this entire tree and flatten it out a little bit as much as possible. This isn't going to happen all in one season. Another beautiful thing about bonsai is that it's an ongoing artwork. There's trees that are hundreds and hundreds. There's probably bonsai trees that are thousands of years old out there. Here's what I've learned so far. Number one, the branches are delicate, guys. I've broke a couple more branches in the process. It's tedious. It's not pretty. I'm probably doing a terrible job, but you know what? It's our first time, and we are kind of starting to achieve that sort of more umbrella look. I think the one thing I want to take away from all this is that I started the whole wiring process with sort of the intentions. Again, I was racing a little bit too far ahead, sort of the intentions of getting everything into position all at once, and that's what caused me to kind of overextend, break branches, do some stupid mistakes. And the real key to all of this, though, is to learn that constraint, to learn that limit, to learn where it's just far enough for this season, you know, knowing that you've got an abundance of time ahead of you. Saved these last two right here for you. Once we get that first little loop on, I'm not sure if you can see that in there, but once we get that first little loop on, we'll move to the second side. Basically at this point, we're just, we're anchoring these wires in. And then from here, we give it a twist, and then we can just start kind of wrapping up around the branch. Trying to be more delicate than I thought I was supposed to be. I knew I was going to be doing some bonsai training today, but I didn't quite know what to expect. And now I do. And it's lovely, but scary at the same time. You want to make sure your first loop is nice and tight, but not too tight where it's going to scar into the tree. Keep in mind, this thing's going to keep growing. But then once you get that first kind of loop defined, it'll be a little bit easier to go through and just loop that wire around that branch. Try to avoid cutting into the little nodes where all the leaves are coming out of and go around them. But other than that, there you go. Got us a new wired branch. I think I've gotten pretty good. That's the last one I'm going to do. And now before we move on to our final step, I want to take an important step, and that is to stand back, to spin your tree around a little bit, to look at it from all angles, maybe even walk away. I could come over here and say hello to you. The point is that when you're creating art, it's important to clear your mind, to step back, to let go of the details that you've been focusing on, and to see everything as a whole, to see the overall shape of this tree as it's taking form right before your very eyes. And now we're finally on to the last step. It's the haircut. Oops, I was supposed to do a double thing. I was supposed to go. It's the haircut. I'm going to start right here. Pop, pop. Just a quick defoliation. Again, as I mentioned, these leaves that have kind of gotten a little bit big. In the wild, these leaves will grow 2 or 3 times that size, and we're going for that compact look. So by trimming these things off, we'll give birth to new, tinier little leaves. And if for some reason every time they come back just a little bit more compact. Take that one off right here. I guess I should probably describe the scent that comes out of this tree when you cut it. It's almost like, you know what it's like? It just popped in my head. It's an unripe mango. Do you know that? You know the flavor of an unripe mango? Well, imagine the smell of that, and that's what I'm smelling right now. Except it's actually Dwarf Umbrella Tree, and it's delicious. I trimmed this thing probably I'm not going to finish that sentence. I don't feel like it. We'll even do some POV cutting for you. I was expecting to do a little bit more trimming of the branches here, but to be honest with you, now that we've kind of got the shape into place, I'm not really finding a whole lot of things that I want to remove. That's the point of doing all this trimming, is to, get rid of the old and make way for the new. Do you see what I'm talking about when it's opening up the shape of this thing? Just the overall shape. Anytime I'm working on any sort of design, anything, and that's really, it's always the underlying factor, is the overall shape that you're going for. Let's step back. Let's look at this thing from all angles. I'm not even going to spin it around. I'm going to walk around because we want to keep our distance. We want to look at that overall shape. We want to look at how all those branches are sticking out. This is almost the end of the video, guys. This is where we make those last final choices. I know what I'm thinking. Is it the same thing that you're thinking? Because if you're thinking that as a last final cut, we should trim this branch and this branch down just a pinch, well, I guess we, by golly, we've been thinking the same dang thing. Get out of my head, will ya? There. And another little snip right there. Maybe one more for good luck right on top here. And by golly, Well, I think she just might be done, but we're not done quite yet. There's a couple more finishing things to do. I'm just kind of enjoying patting the dirt down here. Before I tell you what that is, I'm gonna move you back to that spot over there. Now I know what you might be thinking now that you're getting a further back view of this thing. You're thinking, Ryan, you've butchered it. You've ruined it. What happened? The art of bonsai is not only sort of nudging this plant in the direction that we want it to go, but it's watching it get there. It's training these branches with this wire to point in the right direction, even though it may look a little bit ugly now. And when I spin this thing around, when I take a look at this, well, I see potential. And not only do I see potential, but I'm excited to watch that potential actually grow. Anyways, we're not quite done yet. I was rambling on about how exciting it's gonna be to watch this thing actually grow and all of that, but we've still got one final thing left to do before we can call this video quits, before we can end this bonsai making video once and for all. More gravel. But this time, rather than mixing the gravel with the soil around the roots, we're going to put a nice layer on top of our bonsai tree right here. And this is purely for aesthetic. In fact, as I'm putting this gravel into the base here, I'm sensing, I don't know if you can feel it too, but I'm sensing a ta-da moment. Ta-da! Should I give you an up-close look of the details? Check out our nice layer of gravel cover over our soil. Notice the rocks thrown in to add just a little bit of interest besides those roots. You'll notice I use 1, 2, 3 rocks. Always odd numbers in design. For some reason, it's always odd numbers. It works better. 1 is better than 2, 3 is better than 2, 1 is better than 2, 3 is better than 4. It's just something about odd numbers that looks a little bit more organic. One of those tried and true rules you can stick by. But you know what? I'm not going to be the artist that tells you not to break the rules, so you do your thing. But I usually like to stick with odd numbers of things like little rocks in our bonsai gravel bed. I also stuffed a bunch of sphagnum moss right up in here under all of these exposed roots that we recently brought up from under the ground. Now I'm hoping that given some time, all of this will sort of lighten up a little bit more like the rest of the bark there. But nonetheless, the sphagnum moss not only kind of looks cool, it kind of roughs up the edges, it kind of finishes everything up nicely. It'll also help everything stay nice and moist down in here. My fingers are straining, but it's okay. It's a little heavier than it started. Maybe it's got something to do with the gravel. Ugh. Okay. Okay. Now should that be the front? Again, don't think too much about the upper foliage here. Think more about the look of this root, and I really love the way it looks like that, but do we love it more like that? And there it is, my first bonsai ever, our brand new, not quite brand new to the shelf, but a brand new looking Dwarf Umbrella Tree. Now let me try and think about all the cool things that we learned in this video. The coolest thing for me by far was what was underneath the soil there. When we pulled that tree up and we exposed those roots, and we got to expose all of this extra detail to kind of bring the tree. I didn't expect that would be part of the process, is sort of raising the tree up out of the ground to just expose more of those roots. But that's, in my opinion, that's the real progress we made on this bonsai makeover, was just exposing a little bit more of those roots, kind of creating that little bit of a funnel on the bottom like you see, in those large trees in nature. The top is looking a little bit shabby right now, but all this foliage will grow back nicer and lusher and fuller than ever. If exposing the roots and if shaping all the branches and all that wasn't cool enough for you in this video, then watching that thing grow over the next year, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, 100 years, who knows how long this thing will be alive? Well, that's going to be the exciting part. I normally don't tease the projects that are coming up soon, but I've been collecting supplies for some time, and let's put it that way. I'm not going to tell you what this is. I'm not even going to tell you about the box of stuff that I've got for this in the closet back there. But this is what's going to be next, I think. And unlike our bonsai tree over here, that's going to take years and years to form into its perfect nature, never quite achieving that ultimate perfect look. The next project is going to be beautiful as soon as we finish it. Kind of like this terrarium that we did last time. Remember this guy? I hope you enjoyed watching my bonsai shaping, pruning, repotting, just seasonal maintenance on a beautiful Dwarf Shefflera umbrella plant behind me. Whew! It took a little bit longer than I thought it would. Oh yeah, one more thing. What did I pay for the tree back there? Well, hold your horses. $220. Pick your job. Now it looks like that. But it's gonna look amazing. It's gonna look great.